أهلا ما نشبع.
Hello and welcome to Coca.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the South by Southwest 2021 digital panel on the rise of volumetric video in PR and marketing. We are 3D creatures living in a 3D world, but yet when it comes to our digital content, it's missing one dimension. The world is volumetric, and our digital content, such as our videos, should be as well. And with the online world and digital experiences shifting towards 3 dimensions, marketing and advertising content included, there is a growing need for authentic human captures, including volumetric video. And the use of volumetric video, or as they're commonly and casually referred to as holograms, is on the rise in PR and marketing. And on today's panel, we have brought together a group of leading voices in this space to talk about how this technology is being used in marketing and PR today to deliver value. My name is Tom Memrick, and I will be your moderator for today's panel. I have been in the augmented reality space for a long time, for a decade now. I've worn a number of hats, including a journalist, a VC, a community builder, and I'm now the VP of product at Eighth Wall, the leader in web-based augmented reality, or WebAR. And at Eighth Wall, we are equipping developers, brands, and agencies with powerful tools to create reality content for the browser. This includes the ability to stream volumetric video content in WebAR thanks to many volumetric video integrations that Eighth Wall has, including our end-to-end support for videos created by Microsoft Mixed Reality Capture Studios and their licensees. Speaking of which, we are pleased to have the general manager from Microsoft Mixed Reality Capture Studio, Steve Sullivan, here as part of the panel. Also joining me is Kathy Hackle, a well-known futurist and author of The Augmented Workforce and volumetric strategist at Avatar Dimension, and Sam Wolf, who's an NYU adjunct professor and the founder of Pitch Forward. So thanks everybody for being here. Really excited to be chatting with you today. And Steve, I think this is where we're going to get started. We need to make sure that our audience fully understands what this technology is all about. So let's get started just by talking about the tech. What is volumetric video?
Yeah, so volumetric video it's a lot like normal video that we're all used to, except we capture the full shape of the performer and the performance. And what that lets you do is change your viewpoint at any time during that performance. And that has a number of impacts and lets us do some cool new things. So on a traditional 2D screen, you can change your view. You can orbit around and rotate a figure to, say, get a better look at a golf swing or a yoga pose, or better look at a piece of clothing, etc. But it really gets interesting when you go into AR or VR contexts where you're more immersed in the scene. So for example, if you're watching one of these kind of captures with a phone, you can walk around the character, or you can see the person from the correct perspective in the world compared to where they're staged. And then when you go into immersive environments where you have stereo perception, it really feels like that performer is there with you in the space. And it's a whole different kind of experience than traditional video can provide. And we often call them holograms. They're not holograms. We know they're not holograms. But what people have known from science fiction as holograms, and the way they behave and the way people relate to them, it has a lot of those characteristics. It's a good shorthand for people to understand what this is.
That's great. And maybe we can talk a little bit about how volumetric video is captured and created. So Steve, maybe if you want to kick that off as well and just talk a little bit about the capture process, and then Kathy and Sam adding in what you've learned in your experience within this space.
Sure, yeah. So the way we do it and the way several other providers do it is you come into a studio-like environment and you're surrounded by multiple cameras. Otherwise, we try to make it feel as much as possible like video production. You come into the stage, you do a performance, we take care of hair, makeup, wardrobe, lighting to make a beautiful result. And then you take that hologram and use it in your experiences however you want. So the technology is really about capturing from multiple views, and then some kind of computer vision technology merges those views together to make this 3D shape reconstructed results. And we provide this service at our studios and our licensee studios. Several other providers are out there in the world providing it in other locations. There's a lot of options right now.
Okay, and I know that there's a lot of cameras and a lot of mics. Do you want to maybe just kind of talk a little bit about that? Because it's quite impressive if you actually have been to a studio.
Yeah, it's a lot. We do our best to make it not intimidating. So our highest end studios are up over 100 cameras, 110 cameras or so. And the point of that is so that we can capture not just a single performer doing something, but multiple people doing activities that are interesting. And all those cameras let us look between the performers, and so you can change your viewpoint and not suffer from occlusions and so on. But if you're really all about, like, I just want a single figure, I want to capture the credible performance, authentic performance of that person, you can do it with far fewer cameras, in the 50s or 60s. And there are systems out there that do it with even much less than that. So there really are a range of choices.
Okay. And maybe Kathy, if you can speak a little bit to, once the capture is created and you have this volumetric video, like, how can you use it? What are some of the areas that it can be distributed?
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about the actual capture, Tom? Because I think it's quite interesting. When Steve mentioned hair and makeup, it's a whole process. It's really like when you do a photo shoot and you have a stylist and you think through all these different things. Same thing with volumetric video. You have to think about what kind of clothing you're going to wear, what kind of, what is going to be your hairstyle. Like, there's a whole bunch of different things that actually go into getting the right capture. So, I even wrote about this in Forbes about the, the job of hologram stylist. And that might sound futuristic, but this is really a job that's starting to kind of be created because of volumetric video. So I'm excited about that. I would say, after the capture happens, it depends on what the client wants to do, right? But it depends on if it's something that they want to do on web. Obviously with Eighth Wall, there's been some great examples of volumetric video being used. And I'm sure you might mention them along the way, so I don't want to steal your thunder because you guys have done amazing work. But it's like, how do you want to actually see this? Do you actually want to put a HoloLens 2 on and see, a dancer in front of you, or do you want to see the performance in front of you? Do you want to put it on a web on your website? Do you, for example, Unity did something that I thought was really interesting. They recorded one of their keynotes for Unity for Humanity in volumetric video. They recorded it, and then, even though it lives on a YouTube video, it's still a hologram of that person. And I thought that was quite interesting. So really, the way to use this is limitless. I think one of the interesting things that I'm thinking through is how to use volumetric video for training for the enterprise. Obviously, there's lots of great examples in the entertainment side, but at Avatar Dimension, while we do work with entertainment clients and sports clients, we're really trying to hone in on the uses for training, and I think we're going to get into that later on in the panel.
Yeah, and Kathy, I really love the fact that you're bringing up some of the nuances that are particular to volumetric video capture and the readiness for it. I had the pleasure of being scanned at the San Francisco Microsoft Mixed Reality Capture Studio. It was a really amazing experience, and I'm so pleased to have an actual hologram of myself. But just like the things that you need to think about in terms of the colors you're wearing, but also, what's really interesting is that oftentimes when you're shooting 2D video, just like what we're seeing now with the South by Southwest panel, you really only need to think about almost like the front of you. And so it was the first time, I know it sounds silly, but that I've actually ever seen the back of my head, which was, jarring, I would say, to the very least. But, something that you really need to consider, right, is just thinking about the fact that this is volumetric, this is 3D video. And so as you're styling, as you're thinking about even just the experience and what you're doing with your hands and your body language, it becomes very theatrical in a way. Yeah, and I don't know if anybody else has anything to add on that based on your experience in watching captures or being captured, but that was definitely my experience from my time there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was captured as well, and it is one of those things where you think that you know what you look like, and then you get the full 360 volume of yourself, and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I think all of this ends up being, I mean, it's still part of that evolution, like a emerging tech evolution, and we've gone. People are starting to get an understanding of what's possible with augmented reality and virtual reality, and now, to me, volumetric capture is like that sort of next generation of what's possible with these technologies. It's not sort of flat graphics anymore. If you have talent that's part of your campaign or part of what you're trying to accomplish, and you really want that sense of presence, which honestly, it's sort of funny because when people talk about VR, they talk about you feel like you're there. When it comes to volumetric capture, it feels like that person is there, because it really is, that is sort of the dimensionalization of what a human is really like, or animal, or whatever it is that needs to move around to showcase what you need to do. So I think that we're just at the beginning of really trying to understand what's possible. I mean, it's a little bit, to me, I feel like artists and marketers and advertisers are the ones who first try to figure out how to use a new technology. And I think everybody's still working through that. And then the next evolution is sort of, everyone else. When Kathy said with training that you go, oh, if you really need to feel like the person who's leading the training is there in the room, then volumetric capture would be something that you should consider. It's also fun. I mean, that's why with my company, with Pitch Forward, we focus on, the communication, integration, and adoption of emerging tech. And it's that point where you sort of are feeling a little bit uncomfortable because something's a little new and you have to figure out what to do. And I just sort of do my best to make it less uncomfortable and making sure that people have the right partners, the right knowledge to do that. I do the same with my class at NYU.
That's great. And I was just going to say, Kathy, I love the fact that, Sam, you focused on presence. And I think, like Steve, you mentioned, quite wisely that these aren't official holograms, like scientific holograms. But I think, in my opinion, the reason why they're called holograms is because of that presence, because it reminds you of the many, movies that you may have seen as a child where you dreamed of being able to have somebody else digitally in your same environment, for example. And so I love the fact that you mentioned presence. I think presence is like one good takeaway from this conversation when it comes to volumetric video. Kathy, back to you on what we're going to say.
I was going to say something really interesting, because Sam is talking about we're creating this new, it's a new medium of sorts. It's a new channel. It's a new way for marketers and advertisers to use, right? And with it comes a new language, right? We're talking about, is this a hologram? Is this not a hologram? One really interesting thing that I've discovered with Avatar Dimension, because we are based in DC, is we work with a lot of clients in defense and government, is the word capture. So we were scanning the futurists at the Air Force, and it was really weird to say, "Oh, we're capturing you." It takes on a totally different level, being that he served in the armed forces. So it's interesting when we start to think about the words that we're using to describe this. I just wanted to mention that because to me it was quite funny. In DC, it's like I don't like using the word captured if I'm talking to someone in the armed forces.
No,
I use scanned or something else, because it just I've noticed that it does not resonate well with them. So just a funny fact.
But I think that's where you have to. I mean, most new technology, like, they're trying to understand the definitions, and I think that what shouldn't scare a marketer and advertiser is like, wait a second, there's all these acronyms. Like, tech companies love to create like 7 different acronyms. And I like sort of breaking down that barrier for people of, like, oh, well, you need this, HMD. And I'm like, you just put something on your face, like, or whatever it might be, because that shouldn't stop somebody from trying something new in technology, just not knowing the terms. If you understand the potential and what the tech is a little bit, and this is where, Kathy, when we wrote our book together, it was like, get people over that hump of trying to understand what the tech is. And then from there, then try to, allow somebody's more creative than I am, figure out something more amazing or more insightful on this. I always feel like I'm sort of like a creative brief. I operate as like an in-between creative brief between creators and technologists that say, this is how we can all talk together and make something amazing.
Well, on that note, let's talk a little bit about the use cases. So just one point I just want to recap was, Kathy, what you were talking about in terms of distribution is so important. So this is a 3D asset. This is a volumetric asset. So you pointed out that this asset could be used just on the web as a 3D asset. As we've seen, it could be used in augmented reality and placed in the space. It can be used in virtual reality, which is a simulated space. And so it could be used with devices that you already have, like smartphones, laptops, PCs, as well as some of the newer devices like head-worn wearables such as HoloLens. And so I think that really kind of sets the stage as the massive opportunity. But Sam, to your point about how this is really an asset for today with the massive reach and scale of smartphones and desktop PCs, as well as future-proofed, essentially, right, for head-worn wearables. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the use cases of volumetric video, particular to marketing and advertising. So I'm just going to open this up, and anybody that wants to jump in can start.
Well, I think that when you're talking about volumetric video, I think that there's a tendency to talk about it as a platform, and you make since it's not necessarily a platform, it is an asset. And so if you think about it as photography or video or whatever, but instead you have this sort of video of a person moving, and how are you going to place it onto a platform? And so almost you can, fit that into any potential use case. If you have a company and you're like, I think it's really important for the head of our company to be able to talk directly to all the employees in a way that is really more connected than a Zoom conversation or a Microsoft Meetings conversation, whatever it might be, that you should consider it as a possibility. And what Steve was saying is that there are all different sort of levels of volumetric capture you can use. And I'm actually interested in for Steve and how he's been starting to see the different kind of use cases with the studio.
Yeah, wow. There's been so many of them. Most of them done by licensees who are out there kind of pioneering different markets in different regions. One of my favorite ones recently that's kind of relevant here is the Balenciaga piece, where they introduced their fall 21 fashion line, because of the pandemic restrictions. They introduced it in this immersive experience that was actually experienced on the desktop for most people. I think they built a headset version, but most people saw it on a desktop. And it was much like an online video game, except you roam through it and you experience their models and clothing lines. And you could walk past them, you could go up to them, look around them, and get a sense of what the clothes were. And they felt like it was a good enough representation of the clothes and the model, et cetera, to stand in for introducing their line to the public. And that's an amazing milestone for us. And it speaks to the maturity and credibility. Like, this is a now technology. People are using it now for very high-end demanding stuff. And we only see those markets growing.
Yeah, and Steve, our team at Avatar Dimension actually worked with the team at Dimension in London with some of these assets afterwards. So it was a kind of a team collaboration of sorts. It's a beautiful piece. Anyone that's watching this, please go and try to find it, because it was just a beautiful use of volumetric video, very much aligned to some of the things that I explore with what I call direct to avatar. Is direct to avatar the next direct to consumer? And I think that's a whole other South by talk, but definitely a beautiful example of how volumetric can really showcase, fashion and in a totally different way. So I think some people say, oh, it was done because of the pandemic. And I said, no, it's not. It's here to stay. This type of use for fashion is here to stay.
That's right. The pandemic started it and got us into that zone, but that convenience of I saw that in a way I would never have seen that in real life.
Yeah.
I would never be able to go to a fashion show like that. I would never have access to the models like that. And so it will be a new way that people can reach consumers.
Well, I think that makes a good point of like, it's not necessarily just a person in movement. With this, it's clothing, getting a better sense of what something looks like. And you need the additional cameras to be able to get a sense as to what the fabric potentially like. If you can't touch it on your own, if you can't go there on your own, that a fashion designer definitely would find value in having it captured for people to be able to look closer. And that's what, I mean, I think that's what sort of one of the superpowers, I guess, of volumetric capture is this ability to be able to look so closely and have it be so detailed in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect. That you expect it from a flat video display, but you don't necessarily expect it from a 3D. We keep on saying asset. We probably need a new word for that too, because it's not an object; it's a moving person. But you wouldn't necessarily expect that you could go around this person or near or far or right. How as close as you can get, and that's where I still feel like there's so much yet to explore. There's a lot of dance and music out there that it feels like that's sort of the early adopters of this kind of technology. But I think there's still many other industries that can see how it could apply to them to make it feel like you're closer and in the room with something that's captured.
And Sam, to add to that, I think the brilliance in the use of these volumetric scans of the models was it not just only that you could see the scan. It was used in a game. So it was combining volumetric video and gaming to take fashion tech to a totally different level. And I thought that was beautiful. You know, fashion marketers take a lot of cues from fashion because fashion is very, fashion forward, future forward. You've got 2006, I believe it was Alexander McQueen did a Pepper's Ghost hologram with was it Kate Moss? I believe it was Kate Moss. And fast forward 2020, the Balenciaga holograms and the game. I mean, taking it to a totally different level.
Well, that's what I love. I love it. Go ahead. Sorry, Tom.
Well, I was going to say another great fashion example is what Dimension did with 3 UK and London Fashion Week, where they scanned an actual model, and the audience members, including that same model, which is just like a fantastic story, raised their phone and watched this volumetric scan of the model walk the runway. And so also going back to the Alexander McQueen example, it's like on the runway itself, these volumetric videos are coming alive in augmented reality. And so I think fashion is definitely one of those areas that allows for the movement of the clothing, the ability to see the clothing from all angles. With Balenciaga in particular, you can get up close to models in a way that you may not have felt comfortable to do so otherwise in person, which allows for you to see the garments. So from a marketer and advertiser perspective, where their job is to really help sell and promote the brand and the product itself, it lets the end user get really up close to inspect and understand the garment before they actually purchase. You know what I mean?
And Tom, I want to add something to that related to my holographic adventures. And you and I have talked about this. So I'll tell you the story. Back in 2016, I was thinking through. I was kind of new in the VR AR industry, and I said, what can I do to disrupt PR? Because I was coming from PR at that moment, and I started thinking. I was like, I'm going to create the world's first holographic press release. And I said, okay, I don't even know how I'm going to do that. But I'm going to do that. It was 2016. I went to Google for, my Google friend, and I put holographic press release. The first thing that came out was a post from 2015, April 1st, 2015, that said, announcing new holographic press release service, April Fool's Day. It was a joke from 2015. Oh. Fast forward to 2018, working with You Are Here. And, it was not a super high quality hologram, but we actually launched the world's first holographic press release. It was through Snapchat and Facebook, and it was kind of a volumetric scan of me talking about how you could use this. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because I also want to talk to the PR people that are listening to this panel. So not only marketing, but from a PR perspective, if, for example, with the Balenciaga example, if you can send those assets potentially to the media for them to use on their websites, you know, New York Times, USA Today, all the media are embracing AR and VR and are embracing, you know, if you call them up and you say, I have volumetric assets that you can use on your website, that you can use to, you know, to ramp up your coverage of Fashion Week or your, you know, or your shareholders meeting, I think that there's a lot of power there in thinking about volumetric video and the assets as assets that you can share with the media. So I just wanted to add that because I think it's powerful.
No,
and I want to add.
I totally agree.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sam. Yeah, I think that
no.
I think that what's great about that is that, Kathy, we're seeing actually, especially because of the pandemic, you know, changing the nature of being in person. Many companies actually starting to do that, but not so much per se just for PR, but also for influencers, leveraging the influencer marketing strategy, equipping influencers with, for example, you know, an augmented reality volumetric capture experience that would put a spokesperson in their space to allow them to look like they're interviewing them, or, you know, to help just like augment, you know, no pun intended, their story or the post that they're doing for the brand. So I think that's dead on. And I think that speaks to another use case here, which is we talked about fashion, we talked about models, but volumetric video is so great just for capturing or scanning spokespeople. And, you know, spokespeople are a big part of any marketing or PR campaign. What are some other things outside of the spokespeople, outside of fashion? What are some other use cases that we can highlight to our friends that are watching today within the marketing, PR, and advertising sphere?
Well, I think one of the things that people have started to do is actually, you know, sort of record history or historical, you know, important parts of history. So I would imagine that, you know, museums or foundations should be considering it. And I think that what we have to remember is the fact that we're about to start having a lot of mobile phones have the ability to capture spaces in a three-dimensional way. And so for anybody who's a little like, not so comfortable with high technology, this feels very, you know, years and years away. It isn't. That the highest end phones can now use sort of the LiDAR to capture locations. And if you understand that people are going to be more and more comfortable with three-dimensional space, then you have to figure out how are you going to use three-dimensional space in your campaign specifically, or how to have people interact with it in that kind of way.
That's a good point.
Tom, to add to that, if there are any, you know, this is South by Southwest, so I know there's also a lot of people from universities and education attending. If anyone works for a museum, a university, a library, I want you to think through universities, libraries, museums are going to be the repositories of this future 3D content. So when people say the libraries, that I said, no, you have no idea. Like they're going to be the repositories of these 3D assets. And all of us on this panel and all of us working in AR and VR, we're working in what I call, you know, we're creating the printing press of the future. So these assets will live on as 3D assets. That's why I think, you know, the work that's been done with the Holocaust survivors, scanning them and creating these assets are incredibly important. That's why at Avatar Dimension, we're thinking through how to create a, you know, possibly one of the world's first holographic historical preservation programs, and thinking through how do you retain heritage? How do you retain languages? People speaking the language where you can see their lips moving. How can you retain dances? All these things that should be scanned for posterity, for us to be able to save those things.
It's the Tony Stark, you know, Tony Stark with his parents. Sorry, I have to. The other thing that I also really like, that even though we've talked about entertainment, that I'm recently obsessed with is I've been doing the Supernatural VR where they've captured the coaches, and I do think that it just makes such a difference to be able to see somebody in front of you, to see these coaches. I am surprised that there's not just a run on volumetric capture when it comes to not just, obviously the sports teams have realized the benefit of, you know, capturing somebody like from a football team in a uniform and then having them be humongous within the stadium, but just even that sort of one-to-one kind of world we live in when it comes to at-home training, you have to be thinking about it. You have to decide that you're going to do it, or decide that you're not going to do it. You can't ignore it at this point.
Yeah. Peloton, if you're listening, call me. Yankees, if you're listening, call us. We're on the East Coast.
But I do think that sports teams are starting to figure out that it's needed. I think that we are in this, sort of this in-between stage. And Steve, I'm going to call you out again. I mean, some of this we have to think of the size for distribution, and others is the length now that's available. And I mean, that does put a certain amount of restrictions, at least in the immediate term. How have your clients sort of figured out ways around that, or how long should people, if marketers are watching, how long should they plan accordingly?
Mm-hmm. It really depends on the use case. I mean, technically, we can do an hour-long shoot and stream it. So technically, that's not an issue. In most cases, you do not want to sit and watch an hour-long uninterrupted take of something. There's always a context. There's always some reason to be there. But the longer takes are definitely useful for training. The exercise kind of thing is perfect right on. I need to see an expert do this. I need to see it in a way as though they're there, not just a particular view. But often, the vast majority of our takes are on the order of, less than a minute, and often very short, because they're meant to accomplish a certain kind of purpose, a small purpose in a much larger context. And to a point that was mentioned earlier, these are captured in isolation. Many of them have value in and of themselves, but it's almost always about they're serving a larger purpose. And we always shoot them, stage them, choreograph them with that in mind. There's an experience that somebody's trying to bring, and having a volumetric human being doing something that's really credibly that human being is essential to the experience. That's where you come to us.
Well, I think that experience. Oh, sorry, Kathy. I was going to say this. I think that experience is like dead on, because speaking about sports and speaking about entertainment, including celebrities and performers, there's a ton of activity in capturing performances, and especially, again, like going back to where we kind of hit on a little bit how the pandemic has accelerated the use of 3D, including volumetric video, where we're not able to get to concerts, we're not able to get to stadiums, where we're not able to do experiential marketing at South by Southwest. Like, you're able to still utilize the same creative thinking and turn to volumetric video to be able to bottle that up and capture it, and then distribute it to a scale that you may not have actually been able to tap into originally in the physical world. And so, the Dimension, which is a Microsoft Mixed Reality Capture Studios licensee, they worked with Tiny, UK rapper, on an amazing Burger King campaign that was also involving Bully Entertainment, and essentially he had a single wappa, and it made sense for him to sing as a little tiny rapper, tiny, like literally tiny rapper, singing wappa on a Whopper. I mean, this is not possible. Well, I mean, I'm sure that you could have somehow got Burger King to create a very huge Whopper, like, let's be honest. But just that ability to be able to scan the Whopper and scan the performance, the real performance of Tiny, combine that and distribute that in augmented reality to the masses is very powerful. And just another great example of the use of entertainment and sports.
Actually, a high profile one that's coming up this weekend, Verizon, at our MetaStage partner in Los Angeles, shot several NFL players for Verizon and the NFL, and through the NFL's app as part of the Super Bowl, you can see these players in your living room doing signature moves, celebration dances, however Verizon chooses to use them, and that's a connection you're not going to get any other way.
I want to interject for a second, guys, because I think it's really interesting. What I want to see, and I think where there's a massive opportunity. I mean, if anyone here is spending time in Clubhouse, you've come across all the rooms talking about non-fungible tokens and crypto and decentralized finance. I would love to actually see scans of exclusives. Maybe it's a single, maybe it's a special performance or something that you can only get and access that volumetric performance through the use of some non-fungible token or something where you actually own the performance, or there's only 30 performances available of this exclusive performance of whichever singer it is, Lady Gaga or what have you. I mean, that's where my mind goes on, like, the possibilities of how this can actually scale. So
yeah, I mean, and that's where, when you deal with people who are on the early adopters or innovators curve of things, they love exclusivity, and using emerging tech. And so if you have any kind of if you're marketing any of that, that having exclusive content using a high tech kind of, high tech volumetric capture, then you're sort of like going to excite them. I love, Tom, just talking back to, you said the scale, the possibility of scale with this, which I thought, that is something that what is a bit different than what you might consider if you're going to take a photograph or a video of somebody, this ability to either make it much, much larger or much, much smaller, or, sort of get to other, you could have somebody on a shoulder or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But that flexibility to try new things is something that you might not necessarily, that opens up the possibilities of, for creators. And I just want more people to play with this because, I want to grow this, all these emerging tech industries faster. And I think the more creators and marketers and advertisers that get to play with these new technologies, the sort of faster adoption and integration it gets overall.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's like a good segue into starting to talk about like how marketers and advertisers and those in PR can get started. So, based on your experience, like all of you have had experience in the use of volumetric video. What would you say is like good advice to get started in this space?
I think one thing, and I wrote about this idea with emerging tech, that you first have to understand sort of very broadly, what is the technology before you even start figuring out who you work with. You just need to start, do a little bit of reading, read some of the posts, Tom, that you write, or Kathy writes, or I write, or Microsoft, whatever, and just sort of go like, okay, what are some of those terms? What is, watch what other people have done, and then start figuring out, like, honestly, even if you just come up with a general idea that you're like, I'm feeling I want to do something like this, and then start talking to the people who are experts in the field. Because that's a little bit more difficult, that if you're entering a new technology or trying to, sort of play with a new technology as part of your campaign, it's, you feel like you're sort of like, I don't know who to talk to. And so go and reach out to these people who do know what they're doing and have a conversation, and then they can sort of direct you, or I could direct you, or Kathy, or of who actually does know what they're doing that can help you, figure out what works best for your campaign and what the next steps are, and how much it would cost, how it would feel, how long it would take to do, all these kinds of things that are probably, when it comes to video or creating social media assets, if you're, a seasoned marketer, you already sort of know these things, and you have to be a little bit, comfortable enough to ask and not know the answer yet. And that once you get over that, then it's, then your mind will open up to many, many other possibilities and use cases. I've seen it happen over and over again.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time, and our licensees too, doing that creative ideation. People have a rough concept, like, I need to understand what this is more. I need to understand, I have this idea what I want to do. And we do a lot of work in that pre-production ideation to bring their vision into line with what the tech can do, and to make sure it's shot in a way that's compatible. So we are partners on the journey. We're all pioneering this together. We are creative services as well as just capturing.
I would say that there's a lot of education and handholding that goes in the process. So like for me, if anyone here is watching this and they're on the East Coast, or our studio is the closest volumetric studio, and you're, and let's say we're post-pandemic or what have you, you want to get a tour of the studio, feel free to reach out. If you have questions as well, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever. I'm always happy to talk to people. Sometimes I've had, it's interesting because I was talking to Christina Heller about this on a different panel. She's with Metastage in LA, and she talked about sometimes the conversation could take 18 months, right? To get to from when the person reaches out and then it gets deployed, or sometimes it's like, I need a volumetric scan next week. So it really depends. So for me, it's feel free to reach out, ask questions. I'm always happy to answer them. And then if it is all, if it's possible at some point, when it's safe, happy to give people tours of the studio here in DC.
Yeah, most people that are working in emerging tech understand that there's a certain amount of education that's involved. And so there shouldn't be, that's different, I think, than other industries, and is such a wonderful part of it.
And I think it's great that we're all just indicating that there are so many people that are there to support this process if you're interested, and studios that you can go to, creative development shops that can help you, platforms that can help to distribute. Like I would add that if you're thinking about volumetric video, just get started is kind of the big thing. It's not a tomorrow technology, it is a today technology. And I would almost think about this as the shift from photos to videos, and what were the reasons to shift from photos to videos? It was because you wanted to have a much more engaging experience for your audience. You wanted them to spend more time with the creative that you were creating, to spend more time with the brand. And I'll say that with volumetric video and 3D, you're capturing moments, and these moments are in 3D. And if you think about our experiences in 3D, we spend meaningful time in 3D. And therefore, some of the benefits that you can immediately glean from volumetric video is increased dwell time, increased recall, increased sentiment, and it becomes a memory. It becomes a moment for that individual. And I think we've kind of underscored the fact that this is an experience. It really does feel as though it's an experience, because it is. It literally is experiencing something in 3D. And so keeping that in mind as you're constructing your 2021 PR and marketing plans, if you're looking to break through the noise, if you're looking to engage audience in brand new ways, if you're looking to do something that really satisfies this new at-home strategy that's been brought on because of the pandemic, volumetric video is there to really help rise to the occasion. And when combined with either just 3D on the web, as we pointed out, or with augmented reality, or if you want to even take it further and tap into the growing rise of HMDs, really the sky's the limit once you have your talent and an idea. And those things you're already familiar with because you're doing that with other mediums. What are some of the best practices? I think that would be a good place to leave the panel, but just like final things that now that we got your interest and the PR marketers are going out there and they're going to give us a call on volumetric video, like what are the things that they should be really paying attention to make sure that they succeed, when they actually pull the trigger?
I'll jump in there.
Yeah, sure.
We work with a very wide variety of creators for several years, trying to figure out what's valuable here and what isn't. We want to quickly get beyond the gimmick of, oh, it's a hologram. That's interesting for a little bit, and then who cares? So it's really got to be an experience that requires you to have a 3D performance there. And there are lots of reasons for that. The way it's staged, even access to it, the immersion of it. There's lots of reasons to do that. I think one point we didn't touch on here is the scarcity component. This kind of asset gives you much more control over the scarcity and distribution. You can distribute it widely, but you could also say, hey, this person's going to be doing a concert at this time in this place without worrying about the schedule of that performer, and do it over and over again in different places. So it's an evergreen asset that you can keep and use in many, many different ways in different mediums. And that's what we want to keep registering to people. Like, don't think about this as a one-off thing. Once you have that performance, you can use it in many ways and many times.
No, I love what you're saying with that, because I do tend to talk. I spend a lot of time with clients trying to figure out what I say is the so what and who cares, which is a little harsh, but it is like the who cares is who's going to find enough value in what you're doing to actually potentially buy it, or spend money or give their time. And the so what is like a good sort of reminder of, you're like, well, we'll just have a volumetric capture of this person. And if you go, so what? You
Right.
have to figure out what makes it better for somebody, like makes it more engaging, what drives somebody through that sort of marketing funnel, like what is it about this particular experience that makes it, sort of offer a deeper connection beyond just, somebody saying, hi, I'm the CEO. Like that's not going to do, not going to do enough. And it does take that sort of brainstorming, ideation, some time with the right people in the room to get to it. But once you do, boy, can you can break through, which is really, really fun about this, and how collaborative and exciting it all is, because it does change. This panel a year from now would be different. you know, of what's possible. And that's what's really, you know, even though you say you can use it over and over again, what's amazing is also in a year from now, you might have said, oh, a year ago we could do 1.5 minutes, and now we're up to 10 minutes or something like that. And it's great to be a part of it.
What I would leave folks with is that as marketers and PR professionals, I'm going to include myself, we have an obligation towards our audiences. So want to leave you with the question is, if you're going to use volumetric video, I want you to think about the memory you're going to create for that audience. What is it ultimately that you want to create for them? Because it will be a memory. It's when you have an asset in front of you that is a scan of a real person, it's like in some ways you engage with that asset in a completely different way. So what is the memory you're going to create or that you want to create for your audiences?
That's great, Kathy. And thank you, everybody, for being here, creating these memories together for South by Southwest. Steve, Sam, Kathy, thanks for being here. And hopefully you watching will reach out and ask us some further questions about volumetric video. We're definitely here to take that. So thanks again for being with us. And we'll see you at the next South by.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.